Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies Podcast. My name is Toby Miller, and my guest today is
Alan Tomlinson. I am Emeritus Professor of Leisure Studies at the University of Brighton, UK.
and Alan. We've been friends since, I would say, before Tony Blair was a tickle in his parents' trousers and skirts and underwear.
I think we have, although I can't be precise about that dating thing.
Now, put it this way, we've been friends since
But yeah, no, it is a long time,
it is a long
several decades, definitely.
and
Yeah,
I am
yeah, it is. And maybe getting on to 4 decades.
and I was a fan of your work before I ever knew you. So it's been fun to have the transition from fandom to friendship. But today we're speaking on the 8th of June, 2026, which means it's 3 days until the World Cup starts. Yeah.
The FIFA Men's World Cup. Yeah,
Sorry,
let's
the
be specific
FIFA
about
Men's
it.
World Cup. Yes. And we're here partly because of that, but also because you have a new book out that's very relevant that isn't just about this World Cup. Can you tell us about the new book, Alan?
Yeah, the book, it's entitled What is FIFA For? With a question mark. It's in a series that the Bristol University Press has launched. And it's edited by a cracking editor called George Miller, who was, in fact, the influence behind Oxford University Press's A Very Short Introduction to, those little books that gave you access to theories, narratives, debates, very strong presence they've had, and they're still running. So this book is in a series that Bristol has managed to get off the ground, and not quite with the numbers that the OUP series, of course, is still adding to. The principle of the book is to not be very long. Don't make it too big. It's not a big fat tome. It's about 32,000 words, I think. That's the operation that the editor and the publisher wants. And the key question there is that it's linked to issues which are concerned with, say, transforming society. So very important sorts of things politically, culturally, economically, and so on, and historically. So there's a wide range in these books. The first sport-based one was by Jules Boykoff from Pacific University in the States, and that was called, because these titles all have this similar sort of format, that was called "What Are the Olympics For?" And Jules is a pretty good writer in terms of both the academic side of things, but also the lines that hit in journalistic settings and so on. So he wrote an extremely good book on that. And mine is the second in the series that deals explicitly with a form of international sport. And the reason I did it was because I think sometimes our big academic tomes, are priced at ludicrous levels, and B, are sometimes a mite too wordy, so to speak. That we can all get in academic debates with our favourite theorists and so on. So it's a book that is really the book series that is based on accessibility and discussions about potential socio-cultural change.
That's great. Very valuable, and especially from a fairly new emergent house in Bristol University Press that's obviously got a real energy to it. And although I don't know Jules Boykoff personally, he's been on the podcast, and of course I'm a big fan of Jules' work as well. Now, this isn't your first
Can I also say, I think Jules, alongside you, can help the world understand really more and more what sports washing is.
Indeed, he has. And this isn't your first ball with FIFA. You're a veteran, Alan. How many books have you written about the World Cup, the Men's World Cup in FIFA?
Well, that's well, and only if you take FIFA as connected so strongly with the World Cup or the World Cups, the development of the World Cup, uh, it's not that many. It's probably five or six, I think. Some with John Sugden, my long-term colleague, writing the earlier books, which were really opening the doors uh, about forms of corruption at the highest levels of FIFA and beyond, and so on. Uh, so what is interesting is that sometimes when you write about just say the World Cup or just the big corruption dimensions, you're taking a really quite over, in my view, a quite over-focused approach to understanding what FIFA is. So this little book was an opportunity to open up debates and so on about how FIFA might operate differently should it be shown that it's got many aspects of flaws in its forms of practice, and and um, and it shouldn't just be about the crooks. Though I still write quite a lot about the crooks because there are quite a lot of crooks about,
Well,
and
one of the things
and
about
I do have sources which I've accumulated over the last 30. Well, I've written about on and off about FIFA since the early 1980s, and right at the moment, I've been bagging up all my sources and archives because I'm moving house from A to B, and I have all these materials with me. So I'm noticing just how much material there is still there to explore this topic. And the Bristol book, What is FIFA for? It is really an opportunity to show people what we have in terms of the debate, which directions we might want to move in. What is FIFA beyond just the famous crux of the 2015 of the real blow-ups when the FBI was working with the Swiss police authorities to blow open all the stories of financial corruption in 2015. So in a way, it gave me the opportunity to use a lot of that past material as well, and to present it in a way that I hope operates as an accessible form of prose style, as opposed, as I said, to just some rather more, what might become quite mysterious to non-academic readers, ways of discussing certain kind of theories and concepts. That's what I'm trying to do in this book, to say, well, how the heck did this thing develop from 1904 in its origins, in a little room in a rather fancy part of Paris, in 1904, and how did it get to what it now is, with the most almost unbelievably almost clownish but ridiculously self-loving figure of the current president, the current FIFA president, Gianni Infantino. So, but FIFA is not just about Infantino. FIFA is about all of those football groupings across the world, across the six continental confederations that make up the body of FIFA in a very complicated sort of way. Um, that's that's where its power and picture.
when we go back to those early days, and in fact, really the first several decades of FIFA's life in your book, we see that it really was, or it seems to have been, a club of gentlemen amateurs in the global north, in colonial powers.
Yeah, absolutely perfect. It was a bunch of Europeans trying to get into that little room, this little back room of the National Sports Administration of France. So no, it was very initially elitist, but it did get off the ground, and most importantly. A few years after its formation, 1904, just another decade and a bit along, you could see that actually it was because football was growing elsewhere, where you're sitting now in the Americas and in the South Americas, and in particular in Argentina, there was the emergence of a more global take. And FIFA opened its prospects, if you like, to to football cultures on many continents. So it did do that early, and of course the World Cup, to make a leap, the World Cup of 1930 in Uruguay, paid for by Uruguayan individuals themselves, launched this event, and it's hard to see how FIFA could have got off the ground without that kind of expansion of its membership. In fact, that became a huge rivalry, South America's versus Europe. That's still in a certain sort of way, that and it's not formally articulated, but it's certainly practiced.
And it's also always, in a sense, at the level of the Men's World Cup, been political. I'm thinking here of Italy in the 30s and the efforts by the fascist government to use the World Cup as part of its domestic and international propaganda. And of course,
Yeah, it did so.
the Nazi Germany.
It did so in 1934. Yeah, in 1934 and 1938, the two Italian wins, yeah, and were completely backed by Mussolini, who would be, it was probably at most of Italy's games, and certainly at the finals of the tournaments. And quite interestingly, it the absolutely clear political dimensions of that are not recognised by the FIFA body itself in a certain sort of way. Because what you also saw there, uh, it's a lot. It's a bit of a difficult comparison to claim, really, but you also saw there an acceptance of a dictatorial figure, who then, in a way, really fronted the development of Italy's games and those events and those men's finals in the 1930s, which were, of course, in Italy and France.
One of the things that
So,
seems to apply across history in FIFA is that the sort of strong man at the center of it is a characteristic.
well, yeah,
Is that fair to say?
well, whether it's a strong man in terms of political figures, comparing with political figures is an interesting question. But what these FIFA leaders, getting away from the political leaders of the fascist state in in Italy, and political leaders later, More recently, quite prominently, you can look at Russia, and then you can look at the Gulf states, and their involvement with FIFA and the World Cup and so on, and other events, has been explicitly political in what you I'm sure would see as an extreme form of sport washing. But when you look at away from some of those relationships, um, the men who led FIFA at a certain time, the key is that from 1904 until 1974, these were all Europeans. And it was Yao Havelange, rich, entrepreneurial, charismatic figure from Brazil, who gave a really big focus to the leadership of FIFA, more explicitly linked to commercialization, global reach, um, and new levels of media linked to the global economy. Uh, Earlier leaders, Frenchman Rimet was there for a couple of decades, and I think along with taking on some years near the end of World War One in an interim position, Rimet held things together. He would essentially he was a French um, a French Christian who believed in all sorts of ways the value of sports, based upon at times English models of fair play and so on. But essentially he was driven by a sort of Christian drive. Later leaders like England's Stanley Rouse were quite interesting figures. A school teacher turned international referee, and but also a serious pedagogic mission to teach and train the world, uh, to develop their coaching expertise in football cultures across the area, and to make it truly global. He may have been an extreme colonialist in his relationship. This is Stanley Rouse in his relationship with people in South Africa concerning rights and so on, and apartheid. But he was also a classic sort of school teacher beating you on the head about you cannot make football work unless you have proper coaching, experienced coaches, and fair referees, skilled and fairful referees. So there were this bunch of men from Europe, and then Havelange um, from Brazil, made it, as you said, well, they made it different in the way in which they developed from, the earliest form of gentlemen amateurs into some quite ruthless gentlemen leaders.
But it seems to me, Alan, that pretty clear from your book that along with Havelange's victory and subsequent administrations, we get this expansion where the global south, as we now call it, becomes more important because of all the votes it brings, where there's more commercialization and there's more corruption. Some of these things are very welcome, namely the expansion of power to include poorer countries, poorer in financial terms. But the other things, certainly corruption and to a certain extent commercialization, are a bit of a problem. Give you a quick example that I'd like your comment on. This is the third World Cup hosted by Mexico, as you know, the third Men's World Cup final. The previous two, undoubtedly the most famous, 1970, because the Brazilians were the greatest team of all time. 1986, because the greatest player of all time won the World Cup. But an ordinary working person could buy a ticket to any game on the basis of a day's pay. An ordinary Mexican working person. Today, it is absolutely inconceivable for a working person to attend a match here in Mexico. Something's wrong with that story. What's your view?
Well, I think that's a really essential and important issue. Um, uh, where, where where FIFA operates on really uh, really crudely hypocritical grounds. How FIFA claims, with the kind of rhetoric the IOC always said about one event is better than the other. Oh, this is the best form of event we've ever had, the Olympic Games, oh, the best games ever. And the rhetoric now from Infantino is absurd. Uh, but you know, there's something here, Toby, which is really important, which is that Infantino argues at times that he's not aware of these issues in terms of pricing, in terms of ticket pricing, and so on. So who the heck is? Who is actually running the financial um, story throughout for this? And it is absolutely appalling that your Mexican workers and that can, cannot even dream of going to the stadium. It's only in places where political power, such as the very interesting, mayor of New York, where some tickets purportedly available at $50 or something for certain games in this forthcoming World Cup, are being really brought down to these levels because it's these are the real football fans. I mean, the kind of prices that this forthcoming event is showing are astonishingly amoral.
Well, The Economist is suggesting that on the resale list, tickets for the final are going for 2 million.
I saw that 2 million. Yeah, to sit. I think I sit only to be able to sit behind one goal, rather than sit at the middle of the pitch where it is. And who is buying those then? Who are buying those? Uh, Celebrities.
Vice Chancellor of the University of Brighton, probably.
Sorry, what?
Vice Chancellor
Oh,
of the
right.
University of Brighton, probably.
Oh, I don't know quite what she is up to at the moment.
But Mamdani, the aforementioned mayor of New York City, is an Arsenal
Yeah.
fan. We forgive him that, don't we, Alan? As fans of Burnley and Leicester
Ah,
City, we have to forgive Arsenal fans, don't we?
oh, yes, yeah. So I do have a little soft spot for Arsenal. So I was very upset when Gabriel, who'll be out there playing for Brazil in a couple of weeks' time or so on, banged that book, shot over the bar. I said to everybody in the pub, I said, "Oh, it's not him. He'll boot it over," and that's what he did in the game, in the in the penalty play out with
Champions League
PSV.
final.
Yeah, yeah. So the real worry here as well is that if the game is expanding in access, but also becomes out of reach financially, it really cuts itself off from people. Even the transmission of the event, people will be not recognizing at times, I think, who different fans are. I mean, I'll give you a tiny example. I mean, when I was at the World Cup final. I've only been to three World Cup finals, so I've not got that many stories to tell. One of them actually initially was in 1966. So it was when England did win, and I came down from Burnley as a 15-year-old to, or was I 16? Maybe I was just 16. And the new trains were out. Electric trains were running from Manchester, so it was a big adventure to get on this new technologically driven train, get out of London, find a few tubes, meet my dad, and go to the final. Um, I didn't see a lot of people around me. I didn't see a lot of atmosphere around that. But when you did get closer to the stadium, you met genuine fans. The ticket was very, very low priced. You could get there. You could get there. Yeah, and when I was in the States in '94, but for the World Cup final, which can you remember that result? Wasn't it? It started with one of the Supremes, Diana Ross, kicking the ball against
Yes, she was not the only
the
person.
goal.
She was not the only person to miss a penalty that day.
She was not. She was not. And Italy lost, didn't it, to Brazil? Um, and honestly, on the streets all evening, I was there in California, uh, they were dancing with each other. Fans were dancing with each other. People who couldn't get to the match were mingling with those who were at the match. It's a different phenomenon. You know, there were only 24 teams there in 1994. Then it became 90. It became 32 teams in 1998 in Paris. I was at the final there as well, and that was very interesting. But these were more participatory. There were possibilities of mingling with the people. You know, you could afford to get there. You could be a fan. It's not looking like this forthcoming tournament can give you anything like that kind of atmosphere
Well, we've got a
of
situation here,
football cultures mixing.
Alan. Claudia Sheinbaum, our president here in Mexico, has given away her ticket to the opening event to an indigenous woman. And she is going to watch in a fan
Oh
zone,
yeah, right.
these massive fan zones. There is a lot of anxiety about those
That
fan zones, that they will be places of masculine violence, drug taking, alcohol,
yeah.
and horror. But it's an interesting symbolic act on Sheinbaum's part. But here's the thing. If we go back 40 years to 1986, her predecessor as president went to FIFA and said, this was Miguel de la Madrid, and said the Azteca, which is the major stadium, as you know, in Mexico City, has to have prices that will allow ordinary Mexicans to go. And he beat FIFA's prices down. She has remained silent on the topic.
Mm.
So at the level of a gesture, great, one ticket to one indigenous woman. At the level of actually using any energy to get things changed, nothing. The other thing I say to you, Alan, is that the three principal airports for the games in Mexico, Mexico City, Monterrey, and here in Guadalajara, have had to be massively transformed to satisfy FIFA's standards of an international airport. Now, what in heck is FIFA doing, saying what is an international airport? What does that mean? In the case of Mexico City, 24/7, thousands of workers, and I mean thousands, for months renovating, thousands and thousands, extraordinary inconvenience for us as users of the terminals, and all sorts of rumors, which I won't go into in great detail, as to where the public money is going to when it comes to these public works, at a time when the public works budget in general is drained, other than investment in petroleum, which is nationalized here, as you know, and when public debt is mounting and the economy is not really growing. This is just an extraordinary thing that FIFA can exercise that level of power over what is, I'm still sorry to say, a poor nation. I mean, it disgusts me, to be honest. I'm sorry to be so polemical, but it means a lot to people here. It means a lot.
No, it is. I mean, remember, FIFA is still defines itself as it virtually was in 1904 and certainly consolidated in 1931 or two in Switzerland as an institute, as a body, a non-profit body. It's laughable. I mean, it's one of the ways in which FIFA gets away with all sorts of things because it disperses, it claims to disperse the bulk of its income into the needs of the game across the world. So how is this other stuff going on? There's no brief for it to. There must be deals done under the table, left, right, and centre, and we know that. But one of the real problems in understanding people in recent decades, as this kind of economic behemoth has emerged, is that it can get away with it in Swiss law, and its accountants at times have been really dubious and so moved off or they haven't really doing it. But how do you audit something like that? What kind of organisation is FIFA? And it makes it kind of open to these kind of deals. I mean, I can't quite remember what he said to me about the Northern Australian term, but you could have a little version of that about
This is
identifying the crooks in FIFA all over and the thing about FIFA as well is that these confederations can at times do as they want, and it was away from FIFA itself. It's very difficult to understand the actual finances of this organisation at the moment. And of course, certain high levels of money turning, like what I think was a really not needed event, the Men's Clubs World Cup last summer, the practice for certain sorts of things across the United States and so on. Most of the money there just flooded in from Saudi. Suddenly, all this money comes in from Saudi. Everything changes, but I don't know how that level of FIFA's finances can actually be monitored. If you think about FIFA in terms of all of the different countries and the kind of and all the six confederations, it's something that is beyond my economic brain at the moment to understand quite how FIFA continues to get away with this.
Isn't there a bit of a difference now from 10, 15 years ago, which you mentioned earlier with reference to corruption? The corruption was pretty obvious then, and the FBI got an informant to spill the beans, telling us things that you and others already knew. Now, it's not so much a matter of money in the pocket of these guys, as far as we know.
Yeah.
Much more subtle, much more comprehensive. And it's really about contemporary capitalism as much as questions of individual or collective corruption, it seems to me. That seems like a big difference. But all of that said, you are very even-handed in the book. You do pay attention to the way in which Africa and Asia and the women's game have expanded under the FIFA umbrella. And I wondered if you could talk about those I think we could say positive developments, particularly in the case of the women's game.
Yeah, the women's game. It's a very good story. I think it got its base really in terms of the FIFA profile in Havelange's phase of power. Um, but and of course that's it's very strongly linked to the big theme, isn't it, in the United States, that that meant that women, girls could play sports quite as much as boys and with boys and so on in the educational settings. And then the universities and colleges really picked that up, as I understand it, in the United States, a really important dimension there. And there were some rich chaps around who helped fund the emergence of the women's game at international level in the States, really in the 1990s. So that became, I think, a really good model for the development within FIFA itself of of the women's game. Of course, you have to bring in bunches of people who into FIFA or something like that, who can run it, and of course, um, it's become a very big success now. But furthermore, the last the last event was in Australia and New Zealand, wasn't it? And there is now, they're not celebrated in any public way quite as much as Infantino celebrates all sorts of other things, but they do have a base within FIFA in order to grow the women's game more widely. I think that's been one of the most positive things in that sort of area. It's not funded in any way on a comparable level with the men's game. So there still needs to be some inner political working there. But there's a very strong team who have got it so far, and it is a positive story. Let's hope it doesn't collapse with overexpansion, because of course overexpansion too soon will in a way, at the FIFA international level, it will not look great for the game if there's a very uneven kinds of dynamics in the game. But of course, 48 teams, Toby, in a World Cup, whether it's the men's or the women's, is way over good planning. I mean, that it's just it's greed. What Jules Boykoff in his book Red Card calls the FIFA greed machine. And the FIFA greed machine can produce everything that Infantino claims to be the greatest event in human history. And it can also collapse.
But Alan, we both know the greatest event in human history was the 2015-16 Premier League.
Oh, right, yeah. Arsenal should have won it.
In all seriousness.
Mind you, sorry. I mean, the football dimension, I have to say, it's very sad to see Leicester City in Division 3.
What we think of as Division 3. Now, Prof, one of the things that is emerging at this moment, just in the really hours before the event kicks off, is the issue of the environment. FIFA banning people from having reusable water bottles in games, then rescinding the ban. They're not here yet. because it's
Yeah.
got commercial deals to sell non-reusable liquid bottles. The extraordinary excess of holding this event across three massive countries, none of which have adequate rail systems, requiring huge amounts of jet
Yeah.
travel by teams, by hangers on, by the bourgeois media, by fans. The fact that they're holding it in countries like Mexico and the United States in particular, with massive changes due to what's going on with global heating, players potentially collapsing in the heat of the day. This aspect, it seems to me, means that the ever onward march of FIFA has to stop at some point. This arrogance where it can play with nature eventually will find a limit. Or is that just too dystopian or utopian of me?
No, I think you've done an articulate, accurate, and yeah, really, really interesting account, and I think it can become something barely recognizable now, and how the three countries. I mean, how many? Made it. Of course, it's the United bid. We can go into a lot of detail about that. You know, that again was Trump at work with his son-in-law setting all the deals up so that the FIFA internal body could accept arguments and so on and vote for the likes of those three countries. But yet, I mean, your Mexico story is really important and interesting because how many games are being held in Mexico anyway?
You know,
It's
it's
10 or something, isn't it? Yeah, and Canada the same. And how you know how the political leaders of those countries can tolerate how the FIFA's actions are going on, I don't fully understand. I mean, because this is not doing much good for either of those two countries or football in those countries. It's and Trump doesn't give a damn about it. He's overtaken it as a sort of unofficial you know, master of ceremonies of across the world. It's extraordinary. I mean, how does power work? You're a political scientist, you know, as well as a cultural specialist. What is it that brings those countries in and holds them together for something as absurd as this? And it's going to get worse. It is going to get worse next time round because you know we've got these three countries, four countries, whatever it is, Morocco, Spain, Portugal, it's and dilly-dallying again with events down in South America to try and satisfy countries there. It is out of hand. There is no doubt that it is out of hand, and how FIFA could be brought back from it's very difficult to know. And it's going to make a leap here because its leadership is really important. That somebody like Gianni Infantino, who was seen as a relatively young, aware reformer in 2015, 2016, when he was UEFA boss and so on. And he was on the reform committee in 2016, the reform committee of FIFA. As soon as he got his hands on FIFA, he was getting his hands on other things too, and so on. And then the kind of partnership that they have now, Trump and Infantino, is well, at first you do think that it's quite comical, but it's frightening. And can I give you a little quote from Infantino Toby, because a couple of weeks ago I thought there was a spoof on X or Blu-ray or Blue or whichever place we can try and find an outlet. Uh, and it was, in the words of Infantino, I thought they were a spoof, but they weren't a spoof. Can I read this to you? Gianni Infantino said a couple of weeks ago when I was wandering around Crete in the heat, but I managed to hear this announcement. Quote, I was honored to receive the Titan of Freedom Award. Can I repeat that? The Titan of Freedom Award from Carlos Rosillo, director of Florida International University's Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom. Freedom, freedom, freedom. In recognition of my work in football, leading FIFA and uniting the world through our beautiful game. This, unquote, this man lives in cloud cuckoo land and he's not going to be able to live there forever. It's just it's astonishing. But these are the kind of principles that are underlying the leadership.
One of the things that you invite readers to consider in the book is whether FIFA needs football or football needs FIFA.
Yeah, that's what I wrote somewhere, isn't it? Yeah.
Towards the end of the
Well,
book, does
yeah,
football equally
yeah.
need FIFA, Alan?
Uh, Football, well, we've got cases in other sports of forms of boycott, haven't we? You know, because boycotting, you know, we're starting anew. Um, uh, FIFA does need football, but football does not need FIFA as much. Football, it's life. Is in the communities. Its life is in the growth of the game in the communities. The kids that we see on weekends practicing in the parks. You know, the small countries where, in a way, Infantino supports this because it's good ideology for him to be seen as getting the message out across the world. But the the growth of the game, like we talked about the women game there, you know, to keep the growth of the women game going in communities and so on, and for a more even access to the levels of the game in our communities and in all these societies. It's that's without that, you know, FIFA's got nothing except maybe a bunch of I don't know. You could recreate the World Cup, but with a bunch of selected individuals who nobody really has any connection to. It's the international game, but of course it has a massive global profile in its own way, doesn't it? But the international game is not as important as the grassroots game, the grassroots dimensions that go into into the sport in our communities. We've got to preserve the communities.
And
And now whether go on, sorry,
no, I just
that's
wondered if we could finish, Alan, with your speaking on a personal note. I wonder if you could tell us about how you fell in love with football, because this is a
oh
grassroots story, but it's also a story of a sort of fallen elite as well, in terms of Burnley Football
yeah.
Club. So for situate people, Burnley as a place in class economic terms, but also the football club and what it meant and means to you over the decades.
Yeah, my granddad played for Brentford for 6 years. in what's called the Southern League. Many people listening to this may have never heard of the Southern League, but he lived in a little town near Burnley, from Blackburn, and hovered around Lancashire a lot playing football. But professionally, he gained most by going to Brentford because the Southern League then was paying more to the
And just
professional
for
football.
by note, Brentford is in West London, and
Yeah, what Brentford in West London.
after
And
years as
Black,
cellar dwellers, they're now owned by a wealthy gambler and are in
yeah,
the Premier League.
that's right. Thanks for amplifying that. Yeah. So I had it in my family really that granddad was a footballer. You know, yeah, so and my elder brother played football. My father played football. Um, at school. School was all right. Burnley's a small mill town, or it was once a big industrial centre in the last quarter, to the last quarter of the 1800s. So, but most of all, what Burnley had, it had cricketers, it had famous cricketers who played in the Lancashire League, but most of all, Burnley had been um, League One champions in 1921, you know, had won the cup, the FA Cup in 1914, and Burnley was league champions in 1960. So I was a kid, so I just played with soft footballs in the field in front of our house because I wasn't allowed to go to matches. So with all the boys, no girls played then, no girls at all, I'm afraid. We played football in open land. And at school we got into football. I couldn't stop playing, and so that the grammar school it got more serious, and that was still more exciting. So I was playing sometimes at the university as well, but sometimes 2 or 3 matches a week. And I also became in my early 20s, um, I'm a qualified referee and a qualified FA preliminary football coach. So I did a few things like, PhDs at university.
But
But
when did you
that's
start to?
really what intrigued me. That
So when did you become a critic of all of this?
Sorry, when did I start?
When did you become a critic of all of this? A critic of
Uh, yeah, that's a good. Well, we become critical of the FIFA side. We stick with what my focus has been, organisations and so on. There are positive sides in FIFA's story. We've seen some of those. Not it's just got out of hand in loads of ways. Um, I think became critical um, when it was clear that FIFA itself was was slow in a way to become the leader of this big global phenomenon. Football, I became really quite critical of it with the media changes of the 1980s and 1990s, when television, in a way, which has enabled us to all be domestic fans if we want to be, but it's not the same, is it? It's not the same as going to a game. When that emerged, and how much money went has been into the clubs. So there are the biggest questions at times. Are your national football associations, are they serious about what they claim to be in? Um, and at times there were just too many examples, I think, of, 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 of football finances and many forms of corruption you might call them. So it also became very clear to me at the higher and higher levels that how unaccountable the administrative bodies of FIFA have been, and of national associations in certain contexts. So we've got to watch that because, we mentioned Africa and I didn't respond much on Africa, but Africa is notorious for all sorts of forms of match fixing, and the gambling around the sport. So it's hard to be really critical of these things if you love the game, but also you've got to watch which ways the game are going in. I mean, you've mentioned the heat. We've had a lot of heat at Roland Garros, haven't we? And the people collapsing on the tennis courts, and the top players were just fading out. The global media that controls what the biggest sports is actually creating massive problems, as you implied, really, Toby, of balance, about wearing out players. They may earn such massive figures, but many the count in women's football as well as men's football on ACL injuries and that is bigger than ever before. And maybe we've got to really look at that even more closely.
Well, it's a sad story in a way. It's a story of massive growth of the game and growth of the power of FIFA. The book is fantastic. Like all your books, it's brilliantly researched and written. And it comes from a place both of scholarly endeavor, but also social commitment. So, Alan, I want to thank you very much for writing it and also for spending time with us today.